And he puts down his cards and he leans over and he looks me in the eye and he says, cross the Rub al Khali empty quarter unsupported. Yeah. I'll be your patron, but I'm not going to come with you because you're going to die. Literally, for 10 hours a day, we walked where we could not see anything but just flat sand. So there were really about 3 or 4 days when we really battled with heat stress and we thought we might not make it.
Well, welcome to this episode of the God Seeker Podcast. This is Joe Martin Jr., and today I have as our guest Alex Harris. Alex, man, it's great to have you back again. We've already shot 2 episodes, really, of our interview with you. We talked about, really, your mountain climbing experience, your early days. We've talked about your endurance bike ride on the Tour Divide. And those are already up and posted. And so if you'd like to see those, please go back and take a look at those. Very, very interesting. But today we're going to cover a couple things that I think are absolutely amazing. You know, and that is your trek across the Arabian, what do they call it? The
empty quarter.
The empty quarter.
Rub al Khali, as the Arabs say.
Yeah.
Arabian Desert.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to have a moment and really talk about not just your time in the desert, but your time in Antarctica. Another kind of desert, right?
Yes.
And so I'm glad you're here today. Thanks for coming.
Well, thanks for having me back.
Yeah. Alex, I mean, you got an amazing career, amazing life. You know, we talked about so many great things already, how you escaped death, you know, and you know, you have done what every little kid wants to do. You know, go conquer the highest mountains in the world and explore places that nobody else goes. So what a great thing. Let's talk today. I want to hit 2 subjects. I want to talk first about the Arabian quarter, the empty quarter. And let's just talk about that challenge, talk about your prep for that challenge, why you decided to even do it, and really what came of it. Yeah.
Well, the start of that idea actually happened on Mount Everest in 2005. And I can't recall if I mentioned I was in the company of a guy that the Guinness Book of Records calls the greatest living explorer, Sir Ranulph Fiennes.
Yeah.
And when you spend 70 days on a mountain, you spend a lot of time intimately talking about each other's lives, you know, playing cards and discussing ideas, sitting, waiting for the weather
Sitting in a tent, laying in a tent,
you
sitting
know
in a
the
tent,
story.
laying in a tent, playing cards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Waiting.
Yeah.
And obviously Everest, it's a lot longer. And it was in one of these card games that we were having a conversation with Ran Fiennes around what was still out there that hadn't been done. And just to give some context, I was about to climb and summit Everest, complete the 7 summits. I wasn't the first African to do that. I think I would have been the 3rd by a day. And part of the kind of contractual project my partner and I were involved in at the time would also see us potentially go and walk to the South Pole in a couple of years after Everest. Now, that wasn't going to be the first people to do it, but we would have been the first Africans. So it kind of shifted the bar away from, okay, we're not inventing something new because a couple of Africans have done Everest, but then we're going to go to the South Pole. No African has walked to the South Pole for obvious reasons. Right. But what's beyond that? On the assumption that we get to the South Pole, we're still alive, I still have appetite to do some crazy things, and there's still grace from the Lord to go down this road. What is out there that had never been done? And that question was beginning to intrigue me more and more. And so we're having a card game with Ran Fiennes and a couple of us, and in that card game, I look at him and I say, Ran, what has never been done by anyone in the adventure space? You know, what would be a good sort of crazy goal? And he puts down his cards and he leans over and he looks me in the eye and he says, cross the Rub al Khali empty quarter unsupported. Yeah. I'll be your patron, but I'm not going to come with you because you're going to die. And we had a laugh and we carried on playing cards, but a little seed was sown. And when I look back, over sort of that 10-year period, and I ask myself, why would a guy that the Guinness Book of Records calls the greatest living explorer come to such a quick and final statement that it's impossible?
Yeah. And I don't want to lose the importance of that. Rand Fines is a legend.
Yes.
And he's explored and climbed and done some of the craziest stuff on the planet. And he is a legend, right? I mean,
he's cut off his own fingers because they were getting frostbite. In fact, he's missing. It's a very frustrating thing to play cards with a guy who's only got 3 fingers on one end.
Yeah.
Because he can't hold the cards properly, he can't shuffle, and there's always cards going everywhere. Yeah. But he cut off 2 of his fingers because they were getting frostbite on an expedition. I'm not sure now, but certainly at the time when we climbed Everest, he held almost all the polar records in terms of being the first to walk to the North Pole unsupported, the South Pole, cross Antarctica. And he was predominantly a polar explorer. But interestingly, he'd also spent some time with the British Armed Forces in Oman. And if we go back, and Oman is one of the sovereign nations where the empty quarter is situated. Right. If you think of the Arabian Peninsula, the bulk of that now is the sovereign nation of Saudi Arabia. Then you've got Yemen in the south, you've got Oman in the east, and then you've got the United Arab Emirates, right. Qatar, Kuwait. But so historically, Oman had a long-standing agreement with the British government, and the agreement was relatively simple. The British government could use the deep water port of Muscat, which was very strategic in that area.
Right.
And in return, they would station a garrison of the Special Air Service, the sort of kind of ranger equivalent to the British Armed Forces.
SAS, yeah.
SAS.
Yeah.
And so Rand was part of one of those kind of stations for a couple of years. And he'd lived in Oman. He'd explored the empty quarter, mostly on the back of a Humvee or some kind of military vehicle. But I guess his inquisitive nature had been out there. He'd also been... one of his books, The Atlantis of the Sands, is around finding the early civilization of Ur, and the Chaldeans. Mm-hmm. And so he had some element, but he did all of this prior to Google Earth and the ability to look down from space and figure out a way through the complex landscape of sand dunes that make up the empty quarter. Right. And I think that's what motivated, that sort of bold statement that it's impossible. But I'm kind of wired the way the Lord's made me is when someone says something's impossible, there's like a synapse that misfires and sets off a chain reaction,
right,
where the only end of that neural pathway is...
actually doing what's impossible to do. Yeah.
Correct. Or, maybe not dying trying, but just understanding why do they think that. And so... we kind of I left that conversation. We got up Everest. We then went to the South Pole in the next couple of years and were successful in being the first.
Yeah, we're going to come back and cover that.
Yeah. So we were the first, Africans to walk to the South Pole. And I remember coming away from that thinking, man, I hate the cold.
Yeah.
Like when you spend 2 months in Antarctica with nothing, it's just... and you're African. So I said, look, the next thing I'm going to do, there's got to be no chance of frostbite, And so the kind of ground was just right for this idea of looking at the empty quarter problem. And we began really, my first task was twofold. One, I had to find a team of guys and decide on that number to do it unsupported. Mm-hmm. But I also had to try and answer the question, was Rand Fines correct? Or, am I wasting my time? And maybe some historical context, because the Arabian Peninsula kind of sits in a part of the world that has less sort of cultural trading relevance in terms of spices that it did a couple of thousand years ago. And this was also long before the discovery of oil. And so what happened was... the camel trade routes would predominantly be along the coastline and kind of up into, what's today Saudi Arabia. Of course, back then, none of those sovereign nations existed. Right. So there was never a reason for the Bedu, which are the Bedouin, the kind of the Arab tribes that lived away from the coastlines, there wasn't a reason for them or any motivation to venture deep into the empty quarter, hence the term empty quarter, the Rub al Khali. But in the 40s, another British explorer, a guy called Wilfred Thesiger, he was really motivated by the desert, and he ended up joining a German expedition to try and locate the source. I mean, it's a crazy story. The source of these giant swarms of locusts that would move across Europe and decimate.
Yeah.
And the theory was they came from the empty quarter.
Uh-huh.
So this German scientist had a kind of a station and an office, and he was hiring a couple of guys. Wilfred Thesiger put up his hand, and he went and spent a couple of years in Arabia. And he crossed the empty quarter with a group of Bedu on camels. So a crossing had been made in the sort of nature of the old way. Some of those Bedu, and he wrote a fantastic book, Arabian Sands, where he describes that journey and some of his older Bedu guides that had some memory of where there might be a way through these sands. And then since then, one or two other kind of explorers made similar crossings in the company of Arabs and camels. But what had never been done was someone walking unassisted and unsupported, pulling their own supplies and not relying on the use of Bedu. Although today they're kind of largely extinct, because what happened in the 40s and 50s with the discovery of oil, those sort of tribes that were just on the beginning of the interior moved to the kind of coastal towns.
They were pushed out. Right.
They were pushed out, and so now that area is even more remote than it was back then. So that's the context, And when I started looking at Google images, on Google Maps and Google Earth, of this vast 600-mile journey with these high sand dunes, I realized that there is a way to thread, like taking a piece of cotton and threading these pearls. There is a way I might be able to thread a line through all of these dunes, because there was no way you can go over a dune. Some of these dunes are 500 feet high. I mean, they're big sand dunes. And so began this journey, one of deciding, is it possible? And I think relatively quickly I made that decision. And then once I was thinking about the team, trying to figure out how do we carry our supplies. A sled like the South Pole is not going to work. It has to be a cart, And so began a 3-year build-up until finally culminating in the main expedition. So we went, our first expedition, I think, was 2009, where we made a very simple cart. It had 2 wheels, and we crossed a little piece of what's called the United Desert in Namibia. Obviously, I was still living in South Africa at the time, and Namibia is one of our neighboring countries. They've got a desert. We did that in summer over 4 days, and it was really just to understand what did sand feel like, And we learned some valuable lessons, like one, a single axle 2-wheel cart is not going to work. It puts too much pressure. We broke one of ours, so we combined the 2 single axles into a double axle. And that actually became the kind of architecture that we would fine-tune over the next 3 years. And then the following year we went to the Emirates. We did a longer walk of about a week's, but 7 days, but supported. The following year we went to Oman, and we did an unsupported walk of about 2 weeks now, about 100 odd miles. And then finally on the 4th year, 2013, we set off and made, the long walk of 40 days.
So how do you decide if you're going to walk through the quarter? How do you decide what part of the quarter qualifies as going to middle? I mean,
yes.
You take the furthest 2 points?
It has to be empty.
Uh-huh.
No, so it's an interesting question, because, of course, even in the time of Thesiger in the 40s, the sovereign nations of Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the Emirates and Yemen had not been mapped out. And so the lands were occupied really by different tribes, and it was predominantly those tribes that would then dictate how those borders were kind of mapped out. And Thesiger followed a route from Salalah, which is in Oman, and on the Arabian Sea, and he walked north, and he ended up on the Trucial coast, kind of between what's now Dubai and Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. And he walked pretty much in a straight line north, about 600, a little bit less than 600 miles. But he walked in what's now mostly Saudi Arabia. And at the start of our planning, our kind of loose guide was to follow Thesige's route.
Yeah.
And kind of stick to some of his ethics. In the same sense, when we walked to the South Pole unsupported, what did that mean? Which line did we choose? So our guiding principle was follow Thesige's route. He stopped on 3 occasions where he filled up at kind of local oases with water. Obviously, in the South Pole, you'll hear a bit later how we melted ice. We didn't have to carry water. In the desert, there's precious few places you can fill up with water. So that was our guiding principle. The problem was roughly a third of the way into that journey, where that first little oasis in town was, we would then need to enter Saudi Arabia and cross the border. And so we approached the Saudi Arabian government and spent a long time trying to get permission, trying to explain what we were trying to do, and they just flat out denied us. Today, it's a very different story. Today they've really
Be happy
softened.
to have you today, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
They've softened the requirements for
Westerners,
tourism and all of that.
Yeah.
And so we had no choice, but at that point, we would then have to contour back into Oman and add about another 100 miles onto our journey. And so the total would be around 600 miles. And the irony is that, and so we planned that we knew in advance we're not going to be able to get into Saudi Arabia. The trip's going to be a bit longer. And the irony is sometime around day 20, I think, around 3 weeks in, we're really in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I say that often when talking about the empty quarter, but it's moot because it's all in the middle of nowhere. You get 10 miles away from the town, or any town, and you're the only person on the planet for all intents. Yeah. So we're pulling our cart along, and we notice, and by then you become attuned to notice anything that's not sand, because that's all you've seen for 10 hours a day for 3 weeks. And we see this funny little thing about half a mile off to our left, our west. So we kind of inch the cart along there, and there we find a concrete plinth about so high, and on it is the coat of arms of the Oman Sultanate, and on the other side is the coat of arms of the Saudi Sultanate. We realized that's the border. There wasn't even a physical fence. Yeah. And we could see north about a mile, another little one, and so that would continue for many miles. And we stood around having a word and a bit of a joke. We actually walked about 20 yards into Saudi Arabia, took a photo waving. We were going to send that picture to the Saudi Arabian embassy, but we didn't. And so it was quite ironic that then for the next maybe about a week, we pretty much hugged the border because there was an old military track that ran along that border, and it just made passage easier. But that was pretty much our line. And then, so we started in Salalah, southern Oman. We walked for maybe 30 days, all in Oman, very close to the Saudi Arabian border, actually on it for some time. We crossed that famous, desperate, old kind of swamp that the Arabs call the al-Asamim, which means the mother of all poisons.
Oh, wow.
And just after that, we crossed the border into the United Arab Emirates, and then we walked about another week in the UAE, and we finished at Dubai, down by the Dubai Creek. And we collected some seawater in the Arabian Sea in a little kind of a leather flask, and we emptied it into the Trucial Coast 40 days later.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, it kind of gives you the brief of what you did.
Yeah.
I want to talk more about how you did it. I mean, from designing the cart to what do you carry? I mean, that's a lot of water you're going to have to carry with you, right? I mean, that's a very heavy cart.
Sure.
How do you manage that in soft sand? Well, let's just go back to...
the how.
Yeah, the how.
So... right from the early days, we knew we're going to have to design something that's going to roll. And I played with some ideas around possibly large tires the volume of the tire would be made up of the water. And so some of that centrifugal force would contribute once we'd overcome inertia. But there really wasn't like that out there. There were some inventions in rural areas where these large kind of barrels were turned into wheels for young adults, children, or mothers to be able to carry a significant amount of water from the water source back to their home in very rural areas. Mm-hmm. But that was it. And we looked at one or two of those, but they wouldn't have worked for our purpose. They simply wouldn't have lasted. And the other challenge was that when we spent time with nutritionists and sports scientists, they said that unless we drink about 8 liters a day per person, now I just got to figure out what that's in ounces, 8 liters. That's a couple of
8 liters
gallons,
is
I
like
guess.
8 quarters. Yeah, it's like 2 gallons,
2.2
gallons, yeah.
Yeah. So here's a couple of interesting facts. One, we were doing it in the middle of winter, but our temperatures were going to be 110, 115, 120 on the very extreme days. Mm. And so we couldn't do it in summer, because summer it's 150 degrees Fahrenheit. It's just, that's a challenge for the next generation. Right. But we knew we were going to face significant temperatures, and they unequivocally all said, unless you drink like 2 gallons of water a day, you're going to die. 3 of us, 1 cart. No matter how we played out those sums, no matter how we did the math, we could not get to a end scenario where a cart could carry that amount of water for 3 people. Bearing in mind, we knew we were going to fill up at Mugshin, which was the first little oasis, tiny little town now where Thesiger had filled up. Then a second point somewhere along the Saudi Arabian border, and the third point would be the town of Al Ain, which again, that's in the Emirates. In Thesiger's time, that was a much smaller little village with a date palm oasis. So we were going to fill up at 3 points, and those points were roughly equally around 200 miles apart. Yeah. And so really our carrying need was for the 2 weeks it would take, 2+ weeks to walk 200 miles. Right. And that worked out to, when we did all the sums, about 400 liters. And the 400 liters, so, that's 800, it's almost a ton, so 2,000 pounds of water. Yeah. We couldn't design a cart that would give us the luxury of carrying more than that. And what that translated to, so remember, we're carrying 400 liters for 2 weeks, but we're drinking that water every day. We've got food for 40 days because we can't, the self-imposed ethics of unsupported means we have to say no. And let me tell you, there were a lot of desperate times when people offered us food and drink that we would just have to be ruthlessly disciplined. So the cart solution was simple. I've got a really good friend who's got an engineering business, and we started out with steel, and then he moved to aluminium because it halved the weight. But eventually we worked out a cart that would carry about just over 1,000 pounds in weight. Mm. And that meant about 5 liters each, so about 1 gallon each a day, a little bit less of water. And that was it, Yeah. And they said to us, well, you can't survive on that in those temperatures. But we didn't have an alternative. And so there were really about 3 or 4 days when we really battled with heat stress, and we thought we might not make it. And that was about 2.5 weeks into the journey. But for the rest of the time, I mean, it was on the cusp that we had enough water. In fact, an interesting side fact: your body, when you're that dehydrated, but you still have to perform, and you've got a caloric expenditure, your body becomes so efficient at conserving and channeling liquids. If we went to the toilet and we did a number 2, it was like little pellets, like antelope drop in the wild, and completely clean. Like we literally didn't have to use toilet paper after about 2 weeks, Wow. It's crazy.
Wow.
So that was our cart. We had this cart, 3 of us
like
pulling
an animal.
We would become like animals, absolutely. And we carried food from the start for the full duration. And another interesting idea is this concept of unsupported. There isn't a immediate translation to the Arab language of the words, but there's no translation of the concept of unsupported. Mm. And this dates back to Bedu times, And so I'll share a story that comes out of Wilfred Thesiger's book, Arabian Sands. He talks about making their trip. Now, they just had a bag of dates for 6 or 7 of them to share for a 2-week period, Took them about 2 weeks. And they had bitter cold mornings. And we were going at the same time of the year, but I don't recall that kind of cold, so maybe there's been a shift. Anyway, they're starving. They're about halfway into their journey, and they were already starving. They lived on nothing in those times. They were just people of much simpler means. So they're making their way across the Arabian Desert, and one morning they see a little wild rabbit, we call them scrubbears, bouncing around. And they take about 10 minutes having a debate whether it's worth the energy for someone to try and catch this thing and then have the feast of this one rabbit. But because they know whoever does that, if they don't have a share in that spoil, they're probably going to die, from energy expenditure. So they make the decision it's worth the risk because they're so hungry. And this young Arab guy's bouncing around the dunes for about 40 minutes, and he finally pounces on the scrubbear, and they clean the hair off, and they got this thing roasting on a fire, and the sun is about to set, and Tess is just sitting there, and he's absolutely salivating at the idea of a tiny piece of roast rabbit. And he says, in the next moment, coming over a sand dune, he sees out of the corner of his eye a group of strangers, another group of Bedouin. And in that moment, his heart was filled with nothing but thoughts of murder, because he knew what was about to happen. And as that group of Bedouin arrived in his camp, his guys, without saying a single word, took that roasted rabbit and handed it over to the strangers. It was now their fare to enjoy, And that's the way of the Bedouin and the Arab. It's just a sharing. And it's been like that, I guess, partly because of the hostility of the desert. When we got to our first oasis, Mukshin, we had now covered 200 miles of our first section. And
hang on, I want you to come back to that. How did you carry the water? Was it in plastic bottles? How did you do that?
Large, blue, plastic, they like 25 liter, so what's that, about 4 gallons maybe, 4 or 5 gallon, those plastic water drums. We had them stacked in a frame. So our cart really was just a very simple aluminium frame on 2 axles. We used fat bike tires. Fat bikes are the bikes that cycle on the, they're designed to ride on the beach in snow. But for us, obviously, they served a very specific purpose, very low pressure. And then on top of the water containers, we had just very little of our personal. I mean, we didn't have change of clothes. We had 1 pair of shoes. We had a small little tent, thin sleeping bags each. But we had our food and our solar panel and our comms gear. And then we pulled the cart on the same kind of system we pulled the sled to the South Pole. And that's really a climbing cord, so it's got a very strong braking strain. And you tie a little kinetic chain into it, because what happens is the energy that goes into overcoming inertia, if you don't have that little kinetic chain, you lose that energy. And that dynamic occurs multiple times over the course of a day, over the course of a month, 2 months. Excuse me. So, and then a harness, and our MO was 2 of us would pull, 1 would be off the system, typically walking for an hour, clearing his mind. And that was how we dealt with the social dynamic of being in each other's space. But there were occasions when all 3 of us would have to pull because the sand got so soft. And then we would make sure the length of our cord was at a different length, so we weren't looking at someone straight in the face, because that would irritate us as well, So that was the MO of pulling the cord.
Hot and bothered by that.
Yes. Hot and bothered day in and day out. I mean, it was just, oh gosh. We dreamt about water nonstop, like every minute of the hour, every hour of the day. You see these shimmering oases.
It's a mirage, right?
Exactly.
But is it really true? It looks like water.
It looks like we would stand multiple times in the day. We'd stand there and we'd be like, guys, that's got to be a real oasis. We can see the shimmering, the palm trees, and you become delirious. And luckily, whenever we had that conversation, one of us was always a little bit more sensible and said, guys, we know it's a distraction, stay focused, we'd keep going. But we would just obsess around everything and anything related to water. I mean, I would remember images of playing soccer as a kid on the grass field in a rainstorm without the shirt on my back. The mountain streams in the rock hills where I learned to climb as a kid. The cool water that would, fill your cup, opening a fridge, turning a tap, flushing a toilet, a bottle of water. Water took on this mysterious but ephemeral quality. There just simply wasn't enough of it.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So you got this cart and you're carrying these. Are they round bottles or are they?
No,
square.
The containers, they look like a jerry can for gas.
Yeah.
But they were plastic, sort of square, rectangular, so they slotted in really nicely. We had a little bit of foam protecting them because any kind of rubbing 10 hours a day over 40 days would wear into them. And we would take one and tap out every hour. We would stop and just fill up. We'd worked out our ration, what 5 liters a day equal to about 10. This is not quite 500 mils, but it's close. So, maybe 10 of these bottles a day, there or thereabouts, that we would sip through. And then at the end of the day, when we arrived at our camp, we'd typically arrive an hour, sometimes 2 hours before the sun would set. And someone would always be on a different duty. Someone would be on food duty, so they would be cooking. Someone would be on communication duty, and they would be downloading or uploading using a satellite system, a blog or something. And so you would sit for a little bit of time and just rest. And then we gave ourselves one free bottle where we would mix. We had this hydration drink from a nutritional sponsor in South Africa called Biogen. And we'd call it the Biogen bomb.
Yeah.
We'd fill this thing up and it was flavored tropical or something. And we'd always say to each other, okay, now I'm going to savor this. But without fail, we would glug that in about 2 seconds every single time.
So you were dehydrated every day that you were gone?
Every day.
Yeah.
Not something to be recommended for the long term. I mean, I lost, I could wrap my hands around my quads and touch my thumbs in the front, and I've got pretty big quads from all my cycling. So, and your muscles store so much liquid, but when it's all gone, I lost about 15 kilos, which I guess close to sort of 40 odd.
Yeah, 35
pounds. Yeah. Mostly in liquid and muscle mass. Yeah.
So, it was the day monotonous. Did the landscape change? Was it just sand? How did it look out there?
So that first, I mentioned arriving at Mugshin. So the first third of the expedition was, so we left Salalah, and for 2 or 3 days we're on a paved road because you're coming out of the town. You're crossing a pass over what's called the Dhofar Mountains, and then just as you get over those mountains, you're now on the edge of the Arabian Desert. So we turned off that road and we cut a line straight north. And for the next 10 days, 11 days, we were on what's called the Nedge. And the Nedge is a flat sea of gravel sand, no dunes, just an absolute flat sea with not a slight bump. Literally, for 10 hours a day, we walked where we could not see anything but just flat sand. And because it was quite hard, it allowed us to move relatively quickly and cover about 40 kilometers a day instead of our 30 required, So we had to do about 20 miles a day, to get to the end on our food ration. And the consequence of that was that we arrived at Mugshin, that first little oasis town, about a day or two ahead of our schedule because of the speed. But, I mean, we could feel it in our feet. Our feet were really pounded from that hard gravel. So we gave ourselves a day off. We filled up our water, and we're sitting around, and we're just resting that next day. And a young Arab man comes across, and he must have been in his 20s, maybe his late 20s, early 30s, I guess. And he could speak some English, and he sat around with us, and he starts asking us questions, because it's an unusual thing seeing 3 guys rock up with a cart in the middle of nowhere. They clearly aren't Arab, And we tell him we're making our way across the Arabian Desert, and then he goes and he calls his father, because his father was a young boy when Thesiger came through there, and he remembers Thesiger,
Oh my gosh.
which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So now we're late in the afternoon, and we're showing him maps. His father could speak no English, and his father says something, and the son says, "You're invited to come and have dinner with him." And now we face the kind of first sort of ethical conundrum that we really were unable to bridge in the course of that expedition. And that was to convey this idea that we can't accept help because we're trying to do this unsupported. And that's really where I started getting I mean, I'd read a little bit about the idea in Thesiger's book, but no one had ever tried unsupported, so the dynamic had not come into context with this old sort of historical way of life. And I mean, he was visibly offended, but he couldn't intellectually understand, why would we say no? We've got pitiful, and he asked to see our food, and we showed him his little boil in the bag, and he was like, it's such pitiful food.
Yeah.
Why will you not come and eat my fresh food?
Yeah, sure.
We're trying to convey this idea.
And he's trying to be hospitable.
Totally.
Yeah,
as is the Arab way.
Yeah, and you're saying, no, we don't want your hospitality.
We're saying no, and they interpret that as, very offensive. What you have is better. And he's looking at the evidence, and the evidence is clear. Yeah. It's not better. Your food sucks. What's wrong with you? Yeah. And so eventually, after back and forth, and the son realizes he had a little bit of an idea of what we were trying to do, but he still really didn't understand the motivation. Like, what would motivate you to want to do that? Mm-hmm. And so finally, his father concludes, he asks us, where are you ending? And we say, Dubai. And he points out to the east. He says, you must go blacktop. Now, blacktop is what they call the paved road.
Yeah.
And we said, no, we're going Rub al Khali. And he goes, Rub. And he said something to his son, and his son says, well, my father bids you farewell. You will not be seen again by anyone. So have a good transition to the next life. And he gets up and he leaves.
Gosh.
And he was almost right. I mean, we got hammered the next 3-4 days. We entered very, very soft sand with some low sand dunes, with a freshly laden cart with water and some extra water because we knew where we were going. And that's when we had 3-4 days of heat stress. We did no more than 10 kilometers a day. I mean, that's 6 miles, 7 miles is what we could manage. So desperate was the goal.
Was there an advantage? Why didn't you go at night? Why?
You cannot see. So the way we navigated was, remember I spoke around the sort of lack of Google and bird's eye that Thesiger would have had. Ranulph Fiennes. And so when I plotted a route, I realized that we can't follow that route on a GPX, because the only way we're going to know whether the route is passable on a day-to-day basis is to physically see what lies ahead of us. Because I'm looking at it from a bird's eye view, right, and there was no street view in the middle of the desert.
Right.
So we ended up printing about 80 of these sort of A0 images that we took off Google with our route, actually plotted on it. Mm. But literally on a day-to-day basis, we would stand in the morning with our relevant image and agree roughly where we are. Of course, we had a GPX device, but we would agree roughly where we are, and we would agree on the route we had chosen way back in Johannesburg.
Yeah.
Does it look like we're going to be able to get over that neck, or do we have to make an alternative? And there were a handful of times when we chose an alternative.
Yeah.
And so we could not do that at night. It would just be simply impossible to navigate visually in the dark.
Yeah.
And it worked. I mean, it was cumbersome, but there were 2, maybe 3 occasions when we got stuck on a neck that was either higher or softer than we anticipated based on that Google view, and we would have to physically unpack every container of water, get our cart over, because once the cart was empty, it weighed nothing. It weighed like 40 pounds, It was light. And then carry our individual water containers over the neck or over a sand dune, repack it on the other side, and keep going,
Mm. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
No, it was, but it was one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to.
I was going to ask you, right? The stars at night. I mean, it's a dark,
magnificent.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's
so
no light pollution there.
No, and that first third was the Nedge I spoke about. Now we get to Mugshin. The next 200 miles were going to be the hardest 200 miles, because now we're taking a line pretty much straight to the Saudi Arabian border, and we're entering the high dune country. And the first 3 or 4 days were really small stuff, but soft like a beach, and then we started getting into the big stuff. And the big stuff was such a grand, majestic place, and every valley we entered, there would be signs of oil exploration that predated by 50, 60 years, where emergency landing strips would be created. A plane would land with a team. They would spend a week and do surveying, looking for oil. And most of the time they would find nothing. And so that plane would take off with the team and no one would ever go back in there. And we found plenty evidence of these camps from the 40s and 50s.
Wow.
Very interesting. But we were in a very remote part of the world, and we also realized that the high dunes, so the kind of 500-600 foot dunes, the really big stuff, was a reddish sand, and the sand we were walking on was a lighter colored sand. The Arabs call those valleys in between the sand dunes sabka, and sabka describes kind of a mineralized, calcified, crackly, hard surface. That's actually really hard. You can drive a car on it quite easily. You can roll a cart quite easily. But the high dunes are where our problem lay. And so we also realized that the sand of the high dunes was really clean and always cool to the touch. And so we started going out of our way at the end of our day to make sure our camp was situated right on the edge of a high dune, because the ability of that sand to kind of assuage and relax, I mean, it was fantastic. You know, and sometimes we'd get to our allocated, let's say the plan was to do, 20 miles or whatever, or 9 hours, and we got to our 9 hours, and we stop and we see, but hang on a second, if we go another hour, we're going to get to a high dune. We would go another hour knowing just how precious that change in scenery would be. And we would typically take our shirt off, we would take our shoes off, and we'd sit on that sand right as the high dune hits the sabka. We'd put our tent on the sabka and we'd sit on that sand and just let it run through our feet, and it was always cool and clean. It was amazing. It was just and then of course at nighttime, and I'll share one story about the stars. So everything is strapped on this cart, and we had a few things that were critical, like our solar panel that was every day on, off, our first aid kit, our sleeping pads. On day 4, at the end of day 4, Marco is having problems with his feet. Now, he's got a whole nother story about why he was having problems with his feet. He needed the first aid kit. We look for the first aid kit. The first aid kit's gone. It's bounced off the back of the cart.
Oh, no.
Someone just didn't tie it properly. So now we're having an argument, who tied the first aid kit? But it doesn't matter. The first aid kit is 150. It's gone.
Yeah.
And so we try and make sure we've got it properly tied the next morning. 2 or 3 days later, we realize our sleeping pads, we had only 3 of them. One of them bounced off the back of the cart, gone. So now we've got 2 sleeping pads that we'll have to run across, and 3 of us will sleep. So we've only got the upper part of our torso on a sleeping bag for the next 30 days. But on day 8, we got to the end of the day. Remember I said everyone had a task in the evening. And whoever it was that was on tech and comms duty that evening is looking for the solar panel, can't find the solar panel. Guys, where's the solar panel? The solar panel's bounced off the cart. But now we know it's happened in the last day because we've had the solar panel in use every day.
Yeah.
That day we did 33 kilometers. So remember, we're on the Nedge still. And it's about 5:15 in the afternoon, and we're like, oh my gosh, someone's going to have to go back for the solar panel. We don't know where it is. So we make the decision quickly. I'm not going to go because I'm the leader and I got to stay focused on navigation. So they're not going to compromise me. Marco's not going to go because he's the new kid on the block, and he's
hurt.
He's hurt.
Yeah.
So David's going to go back. So he takes 1 satellite phone. We keep the second, and the plan is every hour he's gonna call us. And I don't know why I thought that Matt is lying just a mile down the track. David walked 25 kilometers back along the trail before he found that. And every hour I phone him, if he found it, he hasn't found it. But he told us the story at around midnight. He he sat down in the trail and he was absolutely heartbroken. He was going to just give up, and say he couldn't find it. And he looked up and he saw 1 billion stars. And the next thing he saw these twinkling lights moving, and he realized it was a plane, and it was almost certainly Emirates, who were one of our sponsors. It was an Emirates plane on the leg that flies back to Joburg down that, and that kind of gave him a little bit of renewed vigor. He stood up, and about 40 minutes later, he found it. So he walked 25 kilometers out, 25 kilometers back, an extra 50 kilometers, in addition to the 33 we had walked. We gave him, at the start of that evening, day 40's ration for all three of us, which he consumed. So we just lost a day's ration. And he got back at about 3, 4 in the morning, and he was so dehydrated that he was urinating blood. And we were actually quite concerned. And we didn't have the luxury of giving ourselves a rest day. We didn't know yet that we would arrive at Mugshin a day or two early. So we had to get up and move. But what we did was we gave David an hour or two extra to try and rest. So we left a bit later in the morning. And then that day, the MO was Marco and I pulling the whole day, and David just limping behind us. And we did that for a day or two, and slowly his strength kind of waned a bit. Our strength waned. His kind of grew a bit until we were aligned, and then three of us would start pulling. And, our two learnings from that exercise. One, you're so tempted to think you're out of the game, like you're never going to be able to catch up. And you're tempted to try and do something drastic to make up for what's been lost. But the truth is, what's been lost has been lost. You can never get it back. We can never get that time back. And so we just kept the discipline to creep back into our schedule, knowing our cart would get lighter over time from the water, from the food. But the other thing we did was we never lost another thing off the back of the cart. Because, boy, the conversation that night around who tires what, we made sure we got our redundancy sorted out.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
So how many days total for you?
40.
40.
40 days.
Yeah.
Wasn't biblical. It was purely,
Yeah.
that's how much food and water we can carry.
Yeah.
And we don't have, and remember we ate days 40, David ate days 40 rations. So when we got to the outskirts of Dubai on day 39, we had literally just a boil in the bag peach dessert to share the next morning
breakfast.
For breakfast.
Yeah.
Or we have it that night for dessert. We chose to have it for dessert, knowing that our other sponsor was the Park Hyatt, and that was the end of our destination, which was only 17 kilometers, about 10 miles. Let me tell you, those 10 miles through the heart of Dubai, pulling a cart, were some of the most hectic, hair-raising 10 miles I've ever done. I mean, we were on 8-lane highways.
Oh, my
we
gosh.
had police stopping us, asking us, where is your car?
Yeah.
And we'd point back Salalah, and they'd be like, Salalah in Oman? Yes. And they had no protocol for dealing with the situation, so they kind of just left us.
Yeah.
But it was pretty terrifying. I mean, we had to get over fences and try and find our way through and around Dubai to eventually get to the Park Hyatt, which is right on the Dubai Creek as it spills out into the Trucial coast,
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy, eh?
Wow.
Yeah.
How did you keep your shoes from melting?
So the sand temperatures never really got above about 110. So that wasn't ever really an issue because we weren't on paved road and creosote and tar. If we were in those temperatures, we would have had an issue. But because you're on sand, you very quickly break the surface of the sand, and underneath the sand is quite cool.
Yeah.
So I don't recall ever having temperature issues with my feet, just the crazy, I mean, those 3-4 days when it was the hottest, where we got a bit of heat stress, and I think came very close to getting heat stroke. In fact, it was on that period at the end of that second. So we've just filled up with Mugshin. We've had our rest day. We've met the elderly guy and we've said goodbye. And now we pull into this really soft, desperate section that took 4 days to cover. We do like 10 kilometers day one, 11 kilometers, 10 kilometers. That's our kind of mileage. But maybe on the first day or the second day, I make a decision to double our intake of water just for that period because I knew someone is going to get heat stroke and maybe die. It was just too extreme, you know. And we hadn't yet figured out that there was an easier way to pull our cart through the salt bushes without getting punctures. So the one thing about our cart, and it wasn't a design flaw, we just really didn't have the need for it to put in a steering system, but we didn't have the luxury of complicated systems. You know, redundancy and the simplest system was going to be what worked. So we had no way to steer the cart. We called it Lefty Lefroy because we had one hip flask of Lefroy Scotch whiskey. It's a distillery. And Lefty because it had this irritating habit of slightly pulling to the left the whole time. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but when you're pulling a cart 10 hours a day for 40 days and it constantly wants to go just a tiny bit left. Anyway, that wasn't a problem most of the time, but in those salt bushes when it was 110 degrees, what would happen is we've just laden up with water. So the cart weighs over 1,000 pounds, and it's so heavy that pulling over a dune no more than that high with a climbing cord that has a braking strain of about 1.2 tons, so a couple of 1,000 pounds. On 2 occasions, we exceeded the force and snapped that it sounded like a gunshot, you know, with the three of us on one side and the cart trying to limber up. 2 occasions we managed to snap that climbing cord.
Wow.
It was desperate. But the problem is once it rolls, and we would just roll over these small, inconspicuous salt bushes, and we would get a puncture. Now, a puncture doesn't sound like a big deal, but now you can't lift the cart to take the wheel off because it weighs 1,000 pounds, so you've got to unpack
Take everything off.
all of those water. That's an hour and 20-minute exercise in 110-degree heat. We found if we got a puncture at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we're done for the day. And so what we did on the second and third day in that desperate place was we would roll 20 or 30 yards on clean sand, and as we got up to a salt bush, we'd walk around to the front, lift it, turn it 30 degrees, put it down, roll 50 yards, stop, lift it, turn it, and that's how we walked for 10 hours. But it gave us an extra 2 or 3 hours because we weren't getting punctures, simply because we weren't rolling over these salt bushes, you know. So you learn little things that require discipline, and initially something that seems harder to do, but in the long run, it's the better thing to do because it's going to save you time and it's going to save you energy. One crazy story, on about day 3 of that desperate situation, we're sitting in this tiny bit of shade. Now, there's no trees, but the cart had a tiny bit of shade. So we're sitting like mongoose in the desert there, just feeling really pitiful. And we hear a noise and we look up and we see one Land Cruiser and then a second Land Cruiser come over a sand dune about a mile up the valley. And we look at each other and we're like, can you see that? Because we're suffering from heat stress. We've been seeing stuff all over, and we agree, yes, we can all see those 2 Land Cruisers coming for us. Now, we haven't seen anyone since we've left Mukshin, and we're going into the middle of nowhere. And 5 minutes later, those Land Cruisers pull up to us. The doors fling open, and these elderly Italian women climb out, and they're like, beautiful man. And they come and put their arms around us. They take photos, and 2 minutes later, they're in their cars and they're gone. And we left standing there like, did we really just experience that? And we were and they obviously were on some kind of desert tour, and the guide had promised them he's going to take them where there's no one. And next thing there, these 3 guys are pulling this cart.
That's
so
funny.
It must have been a strange experience for them. But we were so semi-delirious that none of us thought to get a number, to get some of those photos. So I don't know who those people are.
That's funny. Alex, by this time you were a Christian. You love the Lord.
Yeah.
What all the Lord speak to you? What all the Lord say to you out there in the desert?
So, when you're that desperate and that away from the excess and cut to the bone in simplicity and just close to hearing his voice, we were convinced that he could work miracles, and we tend to think those miracles need to manifest like water in the rock, you know. So, man, we were praying for mountain streams, and they never came, you know.
Right.
And it reminds me of the South Pole, which we'll talk about, and I'll share a story there around why the Lord brings us to these journeys. It's for the circumstance and the process, and nothing you can do to pray or invent or desire something that will make that journey easier will ever make it happen.
Right.
Because you've been drawn to that journey because it's difficult. It's the difficulty of the journey that's required in your life, in your heart, in your thinking, to align, to strip false ideas. And yet your nature still gravitates to make it easier for me.
Yeah.
And the Lord's saying, I didn't bring you here because it's easy. I brought you here because it's going to be really, really hard. You know? So stop asking for ways to make it easy.
Wow.
And, you know, it's even... And then I remember when we crossed the border into Al Ain, so we'd now completed 2/3 of the journey, and we stopped at Al Ain and we filled up for the final time. But we really now only had a week to go, so we could fill up as much water as we needed, knowing we wouldn't have the need for water anymore as much. And right about then, the craving shifted from water to food, because we were also starving ourselves, you know. And that's similar to the South Pole dynamic, except there we were never dehydrated. And so that last week we started craving food. And I remember as we set off, and that last week we were on the odd road, off the road, because now you're going from Al Ain and you're trying to cut a shortcut to Dubai. But as you're getting closer to Dubai, you're starting to get back to civilization. So that last day and the first day out of Al Ain, you kind of juggling roads and tracks until you're finally back in the desert. But you know almost with a certainty that you're going to succeed. Like we knew a day or two after leaving Al Ain with only 6-7 days to go, we knew we were going to make it, because we knew that if the cart catastrophically fails, and we thought it was going to, because we started seeing hairline cracks in the aluminium by the axles, we could just take enough water and carry it on our back if we needed, and just do this last bit. So we knew that success is almost guaranteed. And then we found ourselves in a place of like questioning why we still had to do the last bit. Yeah. If we knew success was guaranteed, why do we still have to grit it out?
Yeah.
Like, isn't there a way we can just like beam me up to the buffet, you know? To get to Dubai in a shortcut. And I remember the Lord saying, look, yes, I've guaranteed that you're going to succeed, but you still have to get there.
Yeah.
You know? I still had to get there. We still had to put in. And so that last week actually became really frustrating in a sense, because it was the same routine.
Yeah.
Wake up in the morning, the same breakfast, walk north.
Yeah.
Do it for 8-9 hours. Do everything you've done up to this point. Yeah. Yes, you're going to get there, but you still, there's no shortcut. There's no shortcut in the beginning. Yeah. And right towards the end of this journey, when we were certain we would succeed, there was still no shortcut.
Yeah, it's like the Christian faith. I mean, you know you're going to heaven. You have a relationship with the Lord. You know it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But between now and that happening, you got to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Right? I mean, and so that was a great lesson.
Yeah, I mean, and we were tempted many times, I mean, that was a metaphysical temptation, because we knew there's just no way we can actually get to the Dubai unless, but there were many temptations around receiving, obviously the first one, denying the elderly gentleman the opportunity to eat dinner with us. But we had a handful of occasions where a Land Cruiser would come by. We're on a little road, or we're approaching the border or something, and the window's wound down, and 3 ice-cold bottles of water are thrust out the window.
That's the devil. The devil.
And, I mean, we learned very quickly that we can't say no anymore. So we would accept it, and we would thank them, and we would wait for that Land Cruiser to disappear over the horizon, and then we would go and put them on the side of the road,
Pour it out.
We wouldn't pour it out.
Yeah.
because we knew water's such a precious thing. Like it just felt scandalous to pour it out.
Sure.
So we never even opened it. We just left it, and maybe someone else can make use of it, but we could not, And the last day before we got to the Al-Ain border, so we're closing on day 30. We're about 20 miles from the border. And what happens is, remember in the early days, the Saudi Arabian border, there was no physical border. We followed those plinths. But eventually we crossed the Samim, that mother of all poisons, and then we got back to the Saudi Arabian border. And now there was a fence, because now what's happening is you're coming into 3 sovereign nations. So Saudi Arabia is about a corner out, Oman's about a corner out, and you're about to cross into the United Arab Emirates. And finally, that fence forced us onto a paved road for like the last 20 miles to the border. I mean, crossing the border, going through passport control, when you're as smelly as we were, in a car, it was very interesting. But that's another story. But now we're walking on this road, and a bakkie is like a small little truck pulls up in front of us. And this old guy gets out, and he's got 3 young, beautiful girls that must have been his grandchildren, because they were his daughters. He's just so hammered by the desert. He looked like really old. And he walks around to the back, and he lowers the back gate, and he pulls out this crate of fresh produce, like apples and tomatoes. And man, my heart broke, because I knew I couldn't say no, but I grieved thinking how much he's giving me, And we looked at each other, and we just thanked him, and he looked like he was about to burst into tears for us, because we looked so pitiful, like he just wanted to help us out. And we stood there, and the back gate closed, and as that little bakkie drove off, I'll never forget those wondering bright eyes of his 3 girls staring out the back window watching us, just anticipating how much joy we were about to experience, not knowing actually that we were just waiting for them to disappear and then take that crate of food and just put it on the side of the road.
Wow.
I mean, I still feel there are days when I feel guilty about that, thinking about that. And I question, why did we impose those selfish ethics on ourselves, for some convoluted idea of what it means to be brave and heroic,
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
But we never put one thing to our mouth. When we actually filled up the second occasion, we arrived so we left Mukshin. We entered the high dunes for about 2 weeks. And as we came out of that high dune area, and we're about 2 days from the Samim, and we're trying to find this old well. Abu Tabul, I think it was called. It's quite a funny story. It's late in the day, and we come down this tiny track, and we get to like a little T-junction where a dirt road goes up there, and we see off to the side in these reeds, there's our oasis, our well. There's no trees, but there's a whole lot of reeds. Right. And so we unclip, and we go, and we dip our heads in this thing. It's cool, but it is so salty, so salty and mineralized. So we just couldn't drink it,
Undrinkable.
And we were a little bit discouraged, so we decided we're going to have a swim, which wasn't a great idea, because that water was so mineralized, kind of like the Dead Sea water. It just cakes you instantly with like this, now we've got this mineralized cake on us.
And it sucks the moisture out of your body.
It's terrible. Anyway, we were desperate for moisture. And so now we know on our maps that there's a military base somewhere there, and we're hoping that we can maybe get to this military base and get some water, because we can't do anything with this water's. I mean, who knows? There's no one around. There's no town. Whoever lived at this well has long since moved on. Since Thesiger's time, this thing's, perished. And we're sitting in this, it's, late in the day, and we're sitting down in the sand, and we're discussing, we're thinking about our options. Do we follow this thing straight? Do we take it? We don't have the luxury of going on a 20-mile hike just to find water. We're going to be out of water, and we can't risk heading to the Samim and Al-Ain, because if we run out of water there, we're really remote. And we hear what we think is a car, and we're like, what? Now, we haven't seen a car in 2 weeks since we left Mukshin. I jump up and I run into the dirt road, and I look up, and I see 2 Hummers that belong to the Oman army coming down with 50 cals, and they instantly stop. But they're about a quarter of a mile off. Yeah. And they watching me. And as I do this, I realize what I've done now, I've just jumped out of nowhere. There were Taliban historically that were crossing the border from Saudi Arabia into Oman illegally. And so the Oman police and army were on really quite high alert. And we had an elaborate security evacuation process set up with a security company in South Africa, a security company in Oman, and the Oman army. And the problem was that we carried trackers, similar to the trackers we use in our events that I carried on the Tour Divide. So you can go online on any day as one of our fans and see exactly where we were. Yeah. But so could anyone else in the public. And that was the caveat that, we might be vulnerable to being kidnapped. Anyway, so it was security-wise, it was relatively sensitive. So now I'm standing in this dirt road, and I realize I've got 2 Hummers with 50 cals trained on me, and I'm like, oh gosh, I can't now run back into the. Right, I've got to just stand there. So I put on my arms, and they slowly creep forward, but they they go into echelon formation. They slowly creep forward, and they get about 20, 30 yards, and they stop. And they just staring at me. Now they're having a big conversation around. And then at that point, I kind of tell Marco and David, okay, just come slowly out of these reeds now. And then they see these 2 guys come out, But we dressed in like we had like a really, we were dirty. We'd been in the desert for 3-4 weeks now, Short hair, ragged as anything. I think they could see straight away we were not Taliban because, we had kind of Caucasian looks. And slowly the window winds down and one of them moves forward. The other one stays back, still trained on us for this 50 cal. And I kind of creep up to, and then the guy says, stay there. But they didn't really speak English, And now I'm trying to convey we need water, and I show them the cart, and they ask again, the car. They always want to know where your car is. And I'm like, Salalah. And slowly they're piecing together that these are 3 real idiots that have decided to walk across the desert, and they're out of water. So I'm like, where can we get water? And he finally, I could never go right up to the window, I got about this close, and he said I think it was about 5 or 6 miles up that road was actually the military base, and I could go there for water. So we thank them, and we move off. And the whole time they were still watching us beady-eyed. We pull our cart up. They radio that these 3 idiots are about to come in. The sun's about half an hour from setting. We arrive, and now they're filling up our containers. But to fill up 400 liters of water, it takes an hour. So we're sitting in this kind of area, and for the next hour, one after another guy comes through with ice-cold Pepsis, trays of bananas and pancakes. And again, we're like, we can't. And they're like, what is wrong with you people? So it was just an ongoing that we just learned to deal with, but we never capitulated.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Here's the last question, then we want to take a break, and I want to talk a little bit about trekking to the South Pole. Would you do it again?
The desert,
yes,
I would.
You would.
And I have spoken.
Why? Yeah, that's my next question.
Yeah,
Why?
Marco and I have spoken often about maybe following the route of the Israelites through what would be Saudi Arabia, just from a pilgrimage perspective, and you can get into Saudi Arabia now, just because it's such a magnificent and undiscovered and unknown part of the world. And why? Because the obvious reasons of the beauty, but the ability for that sand to assuage. I went back actually the next year, and we made the first bike crossing. We rode on fat bikes across, but we took 2 weeks, and we did it with support, So it is a magnificent part of the world, but there was something about that sand, unlike the South Pole where it was hostile and brutal all the time. Something in that sand and the high dunes just managed to and no matter how bad we felt, just always managed to inspire us enough at the end of the day that we could wake filled with the renewed energy and vigor to continue.
Yeah.
And, we've always spoken about maybe taking our families in, just showing them what the sands are like, the Arabian sand.
Yeah.